It was a comedy set inside a Nazi prison camp. But for Werner Klemperer, the man behind Colonel Klink, this story was anything but fiction. He had fled Nazi Germany in real life, and yet here he was, playing one of its officers. And he wasn't the only one carrying a past the audience never saw. Before we go further, I'm curious, which Hogan's Heroes character do you still remember most clearly after all these years? When Hogan's Heroes first aired in 1965, the idea sounded almost impossible. A sitcom set in a German POW camp during World War II. And yet, somehow, it worked. Week after week, audiences tuned in for clever escapes and humor in the unlikeliest place, never quite realizing how much of the cast's real history was quietly woven beneath the laughs. Richard Dawson was impossible to miss. As Corporal Peter Newkirk, he brought a kind of effortless charm to Hogan's Heroes. The quick wit, the sly humor, the unmistakable British accent that made him feel both clever and just a little unpredictable. On screen, he was part of the team, but off-screen, Richard Dawson was already thinking beyond it. When the series ended, many actors found themselves circling the same roles, unable to escape the shadow of the characters that made them famous. Dawson took a different path. Instead of fighting typecasting within acting, he stepped sideways into something no one expected: game shows. At first, it might have looked like a step down, but what happened next was something far more powerful. On Family Feud, Dawson didn't just host, he connected. He leaned in, made eye contact, kissed contestants on the cheek, and turned a simple format into something human and warm. It wasn't about acting anymore. It was about presence. And in a way, that became his escape. While others struggled to separate themselves from their roles, Dawson reinvented himself entirely. Not by becoming someone new, but by letting his real personality finally take center stage. The irony is, millions who loved him on television never connected him back to that POW camp years earlier. He had quietly outrun his own past role. But that kind of reinvention raises a deeper question. If you leave one identity behind completely, what do you lose along the way? And for some in this cast, walking away wasn't just a choice. It was the only way forward. Ivan Dixon's presence on Hogan's Heroes was something entirely different. As Staff Sergeant James Kinchlow, he wasn't just the communications expert. He was one of the few black actors in a major television role at the time, carrying a quiet authority that grounded the show in ways audiences may not have fully recognized back then. Dixon brought intelligence and control to Kinchlow, often playing the calm center in the middle of chaos. But unlike some of his co-stars, he didn't stay for the entire run of the series. He made the decision to leave early, a move that, at the time, may have seemed surprising. But looking back, it reveals something deeper about who he was. Instead of holding on to visibility, Dixon shifted towards something less seen, but arguably more powerful. He moved behind the camera, becoming a director at a time when opportunities for black filmmakers in television were still painfully limited. And yet, he built a career directing episodes across multiple major series, quietly shaping stories from a place where influence often goes unnoticed. There's a different kind of strength in that choice. Not the kind that seeks recognition, but the kind that builds something lasting without needing to be the face of it. In a show built on illusion and escape, Ivan Dixon stepped away from the spotlight, and in doing so, created a legacy that extended far beyond a single character. And as we move deeper into this cast, the stories begin to shift. Because for some, The line between performance and real life didn't just blur. It broke in ways no one watching at home could have imagined. By the time Hogan's Heroes settled into its rhythm, the laughter came easily. The camp felt almost harmless. The guards were outwitted, the prisoners always in control, and the war itself seemed distant, reduced to a clever backdrop for weekly escape plans. But that distance wasn't real for everyone. For some of the men on that set, World War II wasn't just a setting they stepped into under studio lights. It was something they had lived through, escaped from, or lost pieces of their lives to. The uniforms, the accents, the power dynamics, it all carried a weight that never made it into the script. And that's where the show becomes something more complicated. Because while audiences saw comedy, a few of the actors were quietly navigating something deeper. The experience of turning a past that once threatened their lives into something millions would laugh at. Not as denial, but as a kind of control, a way of reshaping the narrative. It's easy to forget that when we look back now. The jokes feel timeless. The tone feels light. But beneath it, there were stories that didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. And as we move forward, those hidden layers begin to surface. Starting with a man who carried the weight of the show itself, and a life that took a far darker turn than anyone expected. Bob Crane was the center of it all. As Colonel Hogan, he wasn't just the lead. He was the steady presence that made the entire illusion work. Calm, confident, always one step ahead, he turned a prison camp into a place where control never truly belonged to the captors. To audiences, he felt dependable, safe, like someone who always knew how the story would end. And for a while, Bob Crane's real life followed a similar arc. Before Hogan's Heroes, he had already built a successful career in radio and television. The show elevated him even further, turning him into a recognizable face across America. But when the series ended, something shifted, and not in the way many expected. Crane didn't transition into another defining role. Instead, he moved into dinner theater, smaller productions, and a life that felt increasingly removed from the spotlight he once commanded. For some actors, that kind of shift is gradual. For Crane, it felt like a quiet drop-off. And behind that, there were parts of his life that became more complicated. He developed a deep fascination with recording technology, particularly video, something still relatively new at the time. What began as a hobby grew into something far more consuming, tied closely to his personal life and relationships. It's one of those details that, years later, would reshape how people looked back at him, not just as an actor, but as a man navigating impulses he never fully controlled. Then, in 1978, everything came to an abrupt and tragic end. Bob Crane was found dead under circumstances that shocked those who remembered him as the composed, in-control figure from television. The case itself became one of lingering questions, debated and revisited over time, never fully settling into a simple explanation. And that's where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. The man who once played the ultimate strategist, always one move ahead, left behind a story that felt unresolved, even chaotic. It's a reminder that the roles people play on screen can sometimes be the exact opposite of the struggles they carry privately. Fame gave Bob Crane recognition. It gave him identity. But it didn't give him protection from himself. And as heavy as that realization is, it opens the door to another kind of contrast, one that feels quieter, but no less powerful. John Banner, the man behind Sergeant Schultz, became one of the most beloved figures on Hogan's Heroes. With his wide-eyed innocence and the now iconic line, "I know nothing," Schultz wasn't a threat. He was a symbol of harmlessness in a place that should have been anything but. But what makes that performance so striking is who John Banner really was. Born in Austria, Werner was Jewish. When the Nazis rose to power, he fled his home country, leaving behind a life that had suddenly become dangerous. Like many others, he rebuilt himself elsewhere, eventually finding his way into acting in America. And years later, he would step onto a set, put on a German uniform, and play a member of the very system he had escaped. There's an irony in that, but also something deeper. Werner didn't play Schultz as a villain. He played him as human, soft, conflicted. A man who survived not through power, but through quiet avoidance. I Know Nothing wasn't just a joke. It became a kind of shield. In a show built on comedy, Werner's performance carried an unspoken layer of meaning. He wasn't glorifying the past. He was, in a subtle way, disarming it, turning something once terrifying into something small, almost powerless. That's not something you can fake. It comes from experience. And yet, audiences rarely saw that side of him. To them, he was simply Schultz, the lovable guard who looked the other way. But behind that simplicity was a man who had lived through the very history the show reimagined. If Werner's story reveals quiet resilience, then Werner Klemperer's story takes that idea even further, into something far more deliberate. As Colonel Klink, Klemperer created one of television's most memorable characters. Arrogant, insecure, desperate to appear competent, Klink was never truly threatening. He was a figure of authority constantly undermined by his own limitations, and by Hogan himself. But off-screen, Werner Klemperer carried a past that made that role far more complicated than it appeared. He was the son of Otto Klemperer, a renowned Jewish conductor in Germany. When the Nazi regime began its rise, the family was forced to flee. Like John Banner, Klemperer didn't just study that era, he escaped it. Which makes his decision to play a German officer all the more striking. But there was a condition. Klemperer agreed to take the role only if Colonel Klink would never be portrayed as competent or admirable. He refused to give the character any sense of dignity that could be interpreted as respect. Klink had to be flawed, foolish, and ultimately powerless. And that choice shaped everything. Every exaggerated command, every moment of insecurity, every failed attempt at authority. It wasn't just comedy, it was control. Klemperer wasn't just playing a role, he was redefining it, ensuring that the image of that authority figure would never feel strong again. There's something powerful in that. For someone who had once been forced to leave his home because of that system, stepping back into its uniform, but on his own terms, becomes something almost symbolic. Not acceptance, not forgiveness, but transformation. Turning something that once held power over you into something you can reshape. And maybe that's one of the quiet truths behind Hogan's Heroes. For some of its cast, this wasn't just a show about outsmarting captors. It was about reclaiming a narrative, one performance at a time. And as we reach the final chapter of these stories, what remains isn't just what happened to them, but what they chose to do with the weight they carried. Looking back now, Hogan's Heroes feels different than it once did. What was once just a clever, light-hearted comedy set in an unlikely place begins to reveal something more layered with time. Because behind the laughter, behind the disguises and escape plans, were people carrying histories that didn't disappear when the cameras turned on. For some, this show wasn't about pretending. It was about reshaping something real. Werner Klemperer and John Banner didn't just play roles. They stepped into versions of a past that had once forced them to leave everything behind, and somehow turned it into something smaller, something audiences could laugh at. Not to erase it, but to take away its power. And then there's Bob Crane, whose story reminds us that life doesn't follow the same structure as television. There are no guaranteed resolutions, no final scenes that neatly explain everything. Just moments, choices, and consequences that continue long after the spotlight fades. Even Richard Dawson and Ivan Dixon, in their own ways, show us that identity isn't fixed. That sometimes the most important chapters happen after the role people remember you for is already over. That may be the quiet legacy of Hogan's Heroes. It wasn't just a show about escaping a prison camp. It was, in a strange and unexpected way, about control. About who gets to tell the story, and how that story changes over time. Because laughter doesn't erase history, but sometimes it helps us face it differently. And maybe that's why, decades later, these characters still stay with us. Not just for what they did on screen, but for what the people behind them carried, transformed, and left behind. If one of these stories stayed with you, I'd love to hear which one meant the most. And if you want more journeys into the lives behind the shows we never forgot, don't forget to subscribe.